So one of the things that struck me when I was reading it earlier as well, and as I reread it now, is what's on page 36, at the end of page 36, where he kind of summarizes the first, sections of his argument. I think, I mean, he's obviously making way too many important points even within that section, but then he says, I think it's a very salient idea that he captures where he says what we mean by original is coming from its source within, like water from a spring. So the artist can only express what is in him. It makes no difference whether or not the same thing has been expressed 1,000 times before. The individual does not make them but finds them. Let him only see to it that he really takes possession of them, and his work will be original in the same sense that the recurrent seasons, sunrise, sunset, are never new, although we name the same. I find that actually a very, very, just a very relevant point made in, from the point of view of the way I think as artists we think today, right? Because there is this constant sort of search or understanding, really trying to figure out, what is one's own voice, or, trying to figure out, one needs to be doing innovative things, new things that have been sort of not seen before in many ways. But I think it's a very, very powerful statement just to have, sort of written in before you, a statement saying that is the nature of art in the East, right? Of kind of where repetition does not mean that it is not original. So this understanding of the difference between something that is novel or innovative or involves variety versus something that is original is, I think, a very, very interesting thing. Although I feel like for me to really be convinced by it, it will take a lot more thinking and sort of dwelling on the idea. But this essence that you may be repeating the same, say, Adavu, the same Tatadavu the millionth time, but it's coming from your body. It's coming from your body's understanding of what that means, and therefore it is original in itself. And it's not about, finding new movement or finding new vocabulary or finding new grammar. That's not the only thing that makes something original, which I think is a very, very powerful statement to make in the context of Indian arts, I feel, because that also kind of underlines or underpins why the Indian arts perhaps has such a huge degree of continuity across centuries, right? There is variation, but there is continuity as well. You always have, similarity that you can trace, right? While there is this allowance for it to be dynamic, for it to find new, for it to wear new, forms, so to say, right? So I found that very striking when I read the essay the first time. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I think that part of the page did not stand out to me until you mentioned this, but when you were just discussing it while this time, it also like played with this interesting idea in my head of what sadhana truly is. Like you said, everybody does the same adavu. Like me doing the adavu 5 years ago versus now is really different. So am I becoming more creative just by repetition? Like incrementally, is it adding on little by little that I don't notice? And that's actually a very interesting perspective to think about, is that even without consciousness, you get more creative by the day by just repetition.
Absolutely. And I think, he's also saying that in perhaps it's not mere repetition, but, he does use that term, right? He says, let him only see to it that he really takes possession of them. And I think that's where the meaning really lies, because that is something that I think in art cannot be taught, right? You can teach somebody how, but taking, like, we say ownership, right? The art, to own that movement is something that's such an intangible thing, actually. you cannot teach somebody how to own the movement, but I think repetition leads you to that somewhere, like sort of mindful repetition, I think leads you to that ownership, beyond which then it becomes original, right? Until that point, perhaps not, but at somewhere we sort of discover that it becomes your own, and it's a very sort of intangible moment, I think. Yeah, but it's still a hard concept to, I think, fathom. I'm just going to read out what some of the comments just so that we have that in. So Parvati saying it's interesting where he talks about the artificial and linked to the art. Yes. And Prachita saying the perennial search to relate to the margam. Absolutely. Right. That's the point sort of we're on as to why and why maybe we have a tendency to also run away from what we have, right? That's something that I've always asked as to why do we feel these sort of impulse to run away from what we already have. It's perhaps, to me, I think from a very personal point of view and a personal experience, I feel it's only the pressure from the external world. Like, I don't think I've ever felt an internal impulse to run away from what there is, because it's always fascinated me. Like, to me, the Margam has always fascinated me, or, the Adava structure, the Jati structure has always fascinated me, because it feels at least like there is so much within it to find, to kind of dig out. But the pressure is always from the external, right? It's almost like, oh, as an artist, what is it that you're doing new? What is it that you're doing innovative is something that's thrown at you constantly. So that's kind of where we tend to veer, but it's therefore for me that sort of line has, it sort of really hit me both the times that I read it, saying, it's okay to just stay grounded and to, do what you trust in, right? And you don't have to sort of think that doing something new means only that means an original voice, which is, I think, a very, very, to me, a very powerful statement, actually. I wanted to, I know that, Apurva, of course, you said that this is the first session you're joining in, but just in case there are, others who feel this way, with the first 2 pages that, that as I read it, it gave me though a little bit of confusion in terms of how how it connects to the previous statements he's made about Indian art. So there was I found it in some places a little bit to clash, because in some ways, like especially what I think Parvati pointed out, the point where he talks about this, what is artificial, in the sense that anything that is, I think what does he say? Everything made by man or done skillfully is a work of art. A thing made by art and therefore artificial. But on the other hand, he also talks about things of arts being things of art always, I mean, in some way is useful or is to be used in some way. I think that confused me a little bit. Like, I understand he comes back to the original point that he makes, but on the other hand, like for instance, the very first essay I felt was talking about the artist's ability to, represent what is behind reality, right? Or represent what is behind form. And I'm just trying to reconcile how that and this statement kind of can stand in parallel, where he talks about how art ultimately has to be, it cannot be something that is does not have use in some way, or something that is relegated to a museum, is what he's trying to say. So it has to be for aesthetic pleasure and provides a support for content. I mean, has to be of some use. So I think I'm finding it hard to kind of come to terms with these two statements and make sense of them parallelly. I don't know if anyone had any thoughts on that, or if anyone felt the same way, particularly in comparison to the very first essay and this one. Yeah, I think I'll just leave that sort of question out there, and we can continue to read. So, we can also see if there's anything else that speaks out to us.
Yeah, thanks, Prachita. Thanks for that. So, yeah, I see what you mean, that he is talking about the process. Yeah, and the product here, but still somewhere I feel like I'm just missing the the flow of thoughts somewhere between how do I as an artist, so my process, oh, if I can think of it that way, so my process as an artist is not to represent nature the way I see it, or my job as an artist is not to just represent nature the way I see it, but to see the reality behind, or see the nature of things behind reality as I see it, right? Or the elusive reality, so to say. But how then does this, is he, for instance, because he also makes the statement simply of like, say temples or images or, things like that as well. He's also talking about, like, one of his examples is a table, and the other example is like architecture, temples, images, so on and so forth. Is he saying that in some way, so far as art is actively consumed, that it automatically becomes a thing of use? Or, because what I don't understand is, as an artist, how do I produce something that is useful, right? And what's interesting to me is that whenever he takes up any examples in this, and that's also a very big tendency I've seen in most other essays in general that is written in the analysis of art, is dance is never included as an active example, right? And it's one of the hardest things to capture, because dance can never leave. It's one of the most intangible in that sense, right? It cannot be recorded in time. I mean, yes, today we can do videos, that's all right, but it's not one of those art forms. Like, even with music, you record it and you can orally sort of recreate that experience. But with dance, it's not that, because you take away a dimension the moment you're kind of recording it on a video. So it's something that's very much being created in the moment, and it's created and lost in the moment. It lives in the moment, it's lost in the moment, right? So how do we understand his arguments from the perspective of art? Because then my question is, as an answer, what thing of use am I creating for an audience? And does he mean that even just simple regular consumption of it is good enough, I mean, to be considered as useful, right?
I'll try speaking. I hope my network supports.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm just sharing what I have understood. Could be completely wrong, but point it out, I would be more than happy. The thing I see here is the first chapter, when I say he's talking about the procedure being unhindered, uninterrupted, undisturbed, is a very individualistic process in me, myself, searching for the reality, the way I perceive it, where I need not be hampered by anything from external source or anything else from the outside. Once that has been understood and perceived, my execution it into any form is just a mere by the way product. That's how I guess I would say that if both of us today are to take the same varnam, your varnam would still remain your varnam and my varnam would still remain my varnam. In that sense, because you have perceived reality with your mind and I would have perceived it with my mind. Eventually the same lyrics, same composition, same dance, whether I use my own movements or someone else's movements, in my thought I am carrying my reality. So I guess what he means there is the thought before the action, and the action being the secondary. And the uniformity of this thought of looking at reality, that is different than the European thoughts, which is common to Asian arts, I guess he means. This is what I understand, because the uniformity of the thought that everything belongs to one source is very, very, very solidly concrete and rooted to us. So whether you, like all roads lead to Rome, is the way we approach. And then that's why I guess, yeah, that's how he comes to the fact that then a mathematician will approach the reality with his idiom. A sculptor would approach the reality that he has perceived and put in his vision through his idiom. Me as a dancer, I would put in that whatever I have perceived.
I was responding comments made about perception, and I was saying that many Indian arts are bending towards that inner peace, that meditation, that tranquility. And so when we think about perception from from the self, and then how an audience or a viewer might perceive it all, it makes sense to talk about the context of what does originality mean. And I was just sharing that somewhere I had read that there is nothing original. It's just our thoughts and impressions that wash over, and then that creates something we think is new.
Yeah, I think that's actually such a profound thing, which perhaps more than any other time is very important, I think, in the times that we live in right now, for us to really reflect upon, because I think it connects to something that he says right after that, which yeah, I think just in the next paragraph, he also talks about then the identity of the artist, right? He says for the Indian artist, the Indian artist, although a person, is not a personality. I felt like that entire paragraph where he talks about the anonymity of most of the older Indian art, right, ancient Indian art, is something that I have always wondered about. I've always wondered about how people for centuries together did not necessarily leave their signatures behind, right? Like whether it's architecture or sculpture or paintings, in so many cases, how is it possible for you to dissolve your personal identity? But somewhere the answer is very much linked to this to truly believe this, right? And not just have it as a philosophy hanging over your head, but to, if one truly believed that, uh, there's a flow of something of which I somehow take ownership of it, I make it my own, I say it, or I present it in my own way, then you're also being able to let go of it without saying, hey, this was created by me, or this is my whatever baby, or my brain child, that kind of a thing, which I find so hard, which I really find this sort of philosophy of thinking, I think, has found its way back to me through various anecdotes at different points of time. And it really blows my mind each time, because I think despite the fact that I appreciate it as a fantastic thing to think, I don't think I still have a channel to really, really come to terms with it or empathize with it in a way that becomes a part of me, right? And especially in our generation, I think so much more than ever, because we're beginning to talk about copyright in the arts, we're beginning to talk about, elements that have not been part of our art forms, right? Even until like, say, 20 years back, not even like a century back, right? Nobody was talking about copyright. So it's a very, very powerful, I think, idea that in a much larger way, that as a community, I think we should be discussing and seeing where do we stand on this philosophy. How does it apply to us, right, as artists on a daily basis?
Maybe also I would say that we were also discussing this earlier, right? Like dance and music, and maybe being recorded, how takes away from that experience of listening or watching, because I do find there are slight variations when we listen to a music recording versus seeing it in person. Or maybe an expression is very powerful in person and not so when we see it on video, that same emotional connection is not there. So perhaps here it's like when someone is building something permanent, like a temple or like a sculpture or something more permanent that's tangible to touch, they don't feel the need to maybe have that personal identity, because that creation is going to last. I mean, ideally, barring any unforeseen circumstances, but it's meant to last. It's meant to be permanent versus an experience, maybe.
So I just want to, if it's okay, I just want to digress and share a anecdote which just stayed with me so powerfully. This is just something that somebody verbally shared, and it was about these artists who make the how do you say the terracotta sculptures, right? The artists who specialize in the terracotta sculptures, and these are from the rural areas of Tamil Nadu. So I think Tamil Nadu and Bengal are the two places where the terracotta sculptures are very like it's belongs to that region. So apparently a couple of these artists had sort of come in, and this is I heard this from Kalakshetra, into the Kalakshetra campus to stay there in residence and to make some sort of sculptures for them. And it was apparently they were apparently asked because they made these beautiful terracotta horses and INRs and all of that things, and they're usually always out in the open, right, out in the forest. That's how they are placed. They're not placed under any kind of a constructed temple mechanism at all. It's always out in the open. So people in the campus apparently asked them at the end of their stay, saying, what should we do to protect these sculptures? Like what are the like typical thing, like what should we do for maintenance and protection and that kind of a thing? And apparently the answer that these artists gave were that you don't protect it. It's come from the soil, and its nature is to return to the soil. So if it returns to the soil, you call us again, we'll create it again for you. Right? So just in the context of the, even this idea of permanence, I don't think permanence was the reason why they were able to let go of or dissolve their personal identities, because the what I understood from this sort of the story and what these people were saying is, for them the art was not in the product at all, irrespective of whether that's going to stand the test of time or dissolve into mud like in 10 minutes. The art was somewhere, it was in the knowledge, right, that helped you create that product. And something about that understanding of that knowledge where you let go of the ownership, right? Like just like you say, okay, it is Tattadavu, I did not create it, but it's still my own because it's my knowledge of how to do the Tattadavu. So that there is something there, like a manner of thinking of art, not through what is put out there, not through the product that is created, but where there is some kind of, I think, a joint ownership felt in the process. Like I said, again, it's not something that still makes sense to me in a manner that I can say, yes, I know exactly what they're talking about. But I just thought I'll share because you raised that idea of permanence, right? Which I don't think is always the case. They were very, very Hi, I'm so sorry. There's been power fluctuations, so I'm going in and out. But
A very interesting point you brought up just before you got cut off. But like one more thing I want to focus on that chapter with regards to this is how he differentiates between Eastern and Western art. And if we think about Renaissance art, all of them have their creator's name attached to it. Like, but if we think of the best artworks in India, we don't know who's done it, at least in our past times. It's also because, I mean, from what I've read, again, I could be wrong, it's just that this idea that art as an offering to God rather than as an offering to something merely just for humans, that something so majestic comes from God and is dedicated to God, and we are just a vessel in the whole process. Like, that's kind of repeated throughout. I feel like when you see like the sculptures in Belur Halebid, it's like fantastic, but like nobody has any idea because they're like, this is for God. That's all they thought, and they made it. And I actually, rather interesting question. I don't know which is a better philosophy to adopt. Like, is it so important to leave your name or to leave the spirit behind, that you can create these works that are beyond human, in nature? It's just an interesting question. I'm not saying either are better or worse, but maybe one allows for more collaborative spirit than the other, and like the other has space for only the truly exceptional, like Michelangelo.
yeah, no, you absolutely said it, because I think that's, I wonder whether, like that's, yeah, one of the fundamental things, right? Because when, and I feel that even about our generation of art in India, the moment it becomes a personality based, sort of greatness that we're looking at, I feel the first thing that I feel as a, not as an audience, but let's say as an aspiring artist, I feel distance. I don't feel, because I will see a Michelangelo or a Picasso and I don't feel like, hey, I can be that, right? My first sense is, oh my God, this is just genius, happens once in like, I don't know, like, 500 years, and there you go, right? But the phenomenal thing is, like, if the quality of the art in our, like, say, if you look at the Indian temples, right, this quality of sculpture is obviously at par, right? It's just genius at its best. But the moment you're thinking of it as like, oh, here are 100, I don't know, sculptors, we don't even know how many, right, who have put this together, and all of them nameless people, there is a certain, exact the word that you use, right, that sense of collaborativeness, but it also gives me a sense of, it's something that can be touched with hard work, right? That sensibility, I think for me as a student of art, that's the main difference I felt. Never as an audience. As an audience, I'm standing in front of greatness in both cases, and I'm just like overawed. But as a student of art, I feel like it's, the moment I think of it as something that, and I think he mentions that also explicitly somewhere, as to the difference between looking at it as genius and looking at it as skill or training or, technical training, is a huge difference in also in the creation of more artists, right? And more artists of that caliber. With the, that's definitely, I feel like I felt it as one of the main differences between the two approaches.
Yeah, like I think the anonymity that it provides is a veil of security that aspiring artists need, right? Like, if you put someone who's on their first day of training and be like, you have to be the best dancer or don't even try, it's kind of like, you don't know where this could lead to. And at least I think for a greater sense of society, I do prefer the Eastern philosophy of you create it and you do your best and you leave it for the next generation. They don't necessarily have to know who did it. But as long as they try to do it, it would probably lead to a more uniformly distributed artistic society. Akka, sorry, are you saying something? I think you're muted.
No. Sorry, I was just continuing to read the rest of the essay. Yeah. No, I wasn't saying anything. But I've kind of not skipped through. I think I just going on to the last page of the essay. Again, some one interesting thing again that he says there is, I think in the second last paragraph, is about also the consumption of art. I think that's also something that has changed so much over time, right? Because this, I feel, in fact, is so essential, because in some way he puts the responsibility on you as a consumer of art, because he's saying so long as the work of art appears to us in any way exotic, bizarre, quaint, or arbitrary, we cannot pretend to have understood it. So it's not to enlarge our collection of bric-a-brac that we ought to study ancient or foreign arts, but to enlarge our own consciousness of being, which is a attitude I definitely think we're going very far away from. Because again, if I take the onus back on the artist, the questions that are always raised about, like from my perspective, would be that as an artist, am I reaching out to the audience? Am I making it understandable? Am I making it palatable, right? Is it making sense? So this movement of sort of moving towards something that is easily consumable versus saying, hey, it's actually, I mean, it's not a wrong thing, actually, right? It's not a wrong thing for the audience to also have a sense of responsibility and develop a sense of appreciation. And that's also a dichotomy that I think very much I live with in my own world, because as an audience, me personally as an audience, I find it very interesting and challenging to educate myself about something that I don't know, right? Like if I didn't appreciate something, my first tendency is to say, but what is it that I don't know about it? Like, can I read a little bit about it? Can I understand it a bit more? Maybe then I'll appreciate it more, rather than say, come on, that's boring, that didn't make sense. That's generally my tendency. But the moment I'm on the artist side, like when I'm at the artist hat, right, then you go back to this, what is your responsibility, right? Should you reach out to the audience, or do you wait for them to take that step towards you? And it's something that I think the fact that he says this, it's just a way of recasting yourself as an audience member, right? And saying that it's in fact, it's in fact as much a responsibility, right, for you as an audience to take that step and say, this is going to help me grow or help me widen my space. And that's the reason why I consume it in the first place. Because the more I feel like what's being presented is being brought towards popular consumption, which is in the moment and gone, then we are taking away that element of, I think, something that is capable of, expanding your horizon. But I don't know if that argument will sell very easily in today's times. It's like, I don't think I can say that, for instance, to any of my friends, who don't say dance or whatever, make music themselves, and convince them that it's something that they will, how do you say, they will not regret doing, right? So
I think the general divide is between artists and non-artists, because like anybody who's put in the effort to learn about an art form recognizes that every other art form could have that equal depth. and like you could tell me, hey, you're not able to appreciate ballet because like Bharatanatyam, it has so many aspects, and I'd be like, oh, maybe you're right, I actually don't. And I'd be like, maybe I should spend some time. But for someone who's never, I don't know, if it's an artist versus non-artist thing, or if it's just a personality divide. Like, some people are just curious about learning and want to figure out what they're going to witness. But I don't know how much responsibility artists can take, because at some point, like, I don't know Bharatanatyam. I would have to know some of it to understand a performance, right? And it's up to me as an artist, I mean, as an audience, to come a little prepared, maybe. Again, that's because I sympathize with dancers more because of the effort they put in. So I may be a bit biased here. But yeah, interesting what the balance between those two are.
Ananya, I see your hand raised. I don't know if this has been for a while, but is there something that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, about this conversation about, on whom should the onus be of understanding art. I also feel that, like, when I go on stage and I present something that's a dance form that is typically South Indian to a mostly North Indian audience in here in Delhi. The thing that is, I mean, the feedback that I get from the audience is that Bharatanatyam is a language that we don't know, and and like any other language, we need to learn the language or know the language in order to understand what is being said. But that is also sort of contested. I mean, here I am just putting out thoughts. I mean, they are not coherent in any manner or so. But I mean, that has also been contested by various artists, saying that, it is an universal language. You don't need to know the exact meaning of the hastas, or you don't need to know the exact vinyogas in order to sort of understand what is the dancer trying to portray. I mean, that's the whole concept of uh, Angika Abhinaya. And but one other, I mean, I'm trying to think about the sort of conversations that arise from artists as well as from the audience, is that this particular dance form has been limited to a certain amount, certain section of the society, and a certain kind of population, which might have also led to the exclusivity of the dance form. I mean, it can also be a cultural thing, because I mean, Indian art cannot be divorced from its culture, and culture has a lot to do with geography. Culture has a lot to do with, I mean, where it belongs to, the place it belongs to. So Kathak recitals here in Delhi are received with an enthusiasm that is not seen for Bharatanatyam. And one might say that it is because, oh, they don't understand the language on which the performance is based on, the language of the song or something. But to appreciate plain nritta, to appreciate plain dance as such, even then I feel like what is more palatable is, I mean, this is a common perception among many of my friends and many of people who come to watch dance here in Delhi, that Kathak is more palatable to the audiences because of their chakkars, because of their thoughts, and because of the way they present themselves. And it always gets me thinking, because it's not every single dance form deals with very complicated rhythmic patterns. So what is it about? I mean, how does the audience choose one art form to be palatable and the other not so palatable? Yeah, I mean, I just put my thoughts out there. I'm in no way answering or putting out a question. It's just I'm just thinking out aloud.
No, I think that's a very, very salient thing to actually think about, because it's also just placed in parallel to what Apurva said earlier, right? That on one side, somebody who already has maybe a sensibility or a affiliation towards one art form, perhaps is already, mentally groomed to kind of, take on another art form and say, okay, let me try and understand that as well, so on and so forth, right? On one side there is that, but on the other side, yes, we're very aware that people have preferences, and very strong preferences of, this is my favorite thing and this I like and this I don't like. And what creates those differences? And like you said, Ananya, it is a very complex space of multiple things that bring you to appreciating an art form, right? That goes beyond just, I suppose, educating yourself about it, like you said, culture, geography, familiarity, childhood sound stories, things like that. So I think but that's a very interesting, I think, whole area to explore, because it will also give us a sense as artists as to, yeah, simply what makes somebody appreciate what you do or not appreciate what you do. I think it's definitely something that warrants like a whole debate on its own, or exploration on its own.
Can I add like one more point that just came to my head? So there was this performance here in Delhi. It was a Bharatanatyam performance, but it was done on Bhojpuri music. And not just Bhojpuri music, even the Alaripu was a cat Alaripu. So it was, I don't remember exactly the name that they have given it, but it was basically based on the movements of a cat. Now, if you look at it from a perspective of somebody who does not know Bharatanatyam, I mean, that performance got a standing ovation, and it got it got invited in various festivals and everything. But as somebody who just appreciates dance or dancing bodies and movements, the cat Alaripu was exceptionally smooth, and it was exceptionally fluid in its movements. The dancer did a fantastic job at it. But at the same time, people who have certain sensibilities towards Bharatanatyam were appalled at the very thought of a cat Alaripu. And then they were heavily criticizing the item, saying that how can you sort of pollute? And I remember the term pollute, and which got me thinking, like, how do you pollute something that is intangible like dance? Anyway, so I mean, can you pollute something as traditional as a Alaripu? And it was a very basic Tishre Ekatale Alaripu, and but the movements were based on the artistic movements of a cat, and therefore it was called Billi Alaripu or something like that. But as from the perspective of a North Indian audience here in Delhi, it was a fantastic performance. It was something that people could not take out of their heads for a long time. Like it went viral on Instagram, and people showered praises on the dancer. So again, like, it makes me think what is acceptable to somebody is not acceptable to other, and what interests somebody. The sensibilities, like you said, also has a certain, I mean, also comes with a certain image of the art form. Like, the art form has to be of a certain way for it to be liked. I mean, that's what I think. Like, some really like traditional margams, other do not like traditional margams. They want to go out and do very innovative. They want to combine other dance forms and create something new. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty complex, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. We're standing at 9:35, so maybe we'll just use the last few minutes to, pull any final thoughts together. Anybody wants to share anything as a like concluding thoughts or questions? Anything like that?
Sorry, I was not able to. I'm not a big talker generally.
Sorry.
Yeah, hi. No, I think like Ananya said, it's there in everything, in all kinds of art forms, right? Like movies, there's commercial movies that is um, generally accepted by the audience and everything, and there's this art movies that is for only a particular, is there for everywhere generally. So I think that's universal. Whoever needs what, they can just enjoy it. That's the start, right? I don't know if it's a concluding thing, but that's just I feel like everybody to its own, yeah, to them own.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a good note to bring the discussion to an end as well. Thanks, Parvati. Thanks everyone. I know some people had to leave early, but thanks Ananya, thanks Parvati, thanks everyone for being here. We'll try and see if I honestly feel that these last 5 essays that we've read has so much in it for us to sort of revisit. So we'll just move on as planned for the subsequent weeks. But I feel like somewhere towards the end, it would be nice to pull up some of these key questions that we've left hanging and maybe readdress them or something like that. Let's think of maybe adding on a session like that towards the end. But in the meantime, yeah, we'll see you all next week with the next chapter. Okay. Thank you. Thanks. Bye.